We appeal to the Jewish people throughout the diaspora to rally around the Jews of Eretz Israel and to stand by them in the great struggle for the realization of the age-old dream, the redemption of Israel. Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel, we affix our signatures to the proclamation on the soil of the homeland, in the city of Tel Aviv, on this Shabbat Eve, the 1948.
And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of God's Unchanging Word. Today we have a very special program. We're going to divert from our normal way that we do our program on this special Friday, May 11th, as we pay tribute to Israel on the 70th anniversary. All eyes this weekend are going to be focused on Jerusalem. The Bible tells us that when Jesus Christ returns, that every eye will see his coming. It says, and on that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. This small nation, and even smaller city, has been the center of conflict and controversy from the beginning of time, and it won't stop until Jesus Christ returns. We're not going to talk about the prophecy, but we're going to bring in today tidbits, nuggets as we call them, of prophetic insight of what's been taking place for the last 100 years for the state of Israel. So on this week, News, Nuggets, and Insights, we'll be having a special Israel at the age of 70. We're going to begin with 1917 to 2018, 101 years of transformation. We'll talk about the modern day Israel from 1948, a nation born in a day. And then we're going to talk about the Jerusalem in 1967 of the takeover in Israel and what that means and why there's so much conflict today. So sit back and get ready for a very exciting program. We're going to tell you this story through lots of video pieces and going to make it very interesting. We're going to give you a timeline of the modern day Israel of Jerusalem at 70 years old in Israel. So as we begin, let's do something. We're going to take the entire Old Testament in pieces and bring you up to date in about 5 minutes. We call this Israel Rewound. Let's play that video now.
In the beginning, God created the universe and a planet called Earth. Humans were formed in God's image to continue God's work. But soon, humans decided we want to live our way, not God's. Selfishness and violence filled the world, so God started over with just one family. And God made a covenant with a man named Abraham. The land around you is now yours. Your family will be my blessing to the entire world. In just a few generations, they grew into a large nation named Israel. The Egyptians became fearful and forced the Israelites to be their slaves. Through a humble leader named Moses, God led the Israelites in a great exodus back toward their promised land. Along the journey, God gave laws and commands to help the Israelites follow God's ways. Finally, after 40 years of struggle and complaining in the desert, the Israelites arrived back home in the promised land. In victory, the people worshipped God, but soon after, they turned from God and lived their own rebellious ways. This became a pattern from generation to generation. Israel's greatest judge was Samuel. He followed God's ways and spoke for God as a prophet. He told Israel that God was the only king they ever needed. But they desired to be like the corrupt nations surrounding them and insisted, "We want a human king who we can see to rule over us just like the other nations." So Samuel found a man named Saul to be Israel's first king. His reign began well, but before long, Saul stopped following God's ways and made many bad decisions. So Samuel told Saul, "Because you have turned your back on God, God has rejected you as a king." Samuel's search for the next king led to a courageous young shepherd boy named David. When David grew up to be king, God blessed him and the Israelites greatly. But David was not perfect. He had an affair with a married woman and committed a murder to cover it up. But deep inside, David always loved God and would return to living in God's ways. Known as the poet warrior, he wrote music to God called psalms, heartfelt expressions of prayer, struggle, and thankfulness. After many years as king, David gave the throne to his son Solomon. God also told David, "One day, one of your descendants will rule with a kingdom that will never end." Solomon succeeded his father David, becoming the richest king in Israel's history. Full of God's wisdom, Solomon wrote books like Proverbs and built a magnificent temple, a permanent tabernacle reminding people of God's continual presence. But Solomon strayed from God, marrying corrupt wives who led him into worshiping false gods. Civil war broke out, dividing the country into a northern kingdom called Israel and a southern kingdom called Judah. Soon, both of these kingdoms were led by corrupt kings who ignored God's ways. During this time, prophets were sent as messengers, calling the Israelites to return to God. They warned of the destructive consequences ahead. The prophet Elijah, a wild and rugged man, showed up false prophets by calling on God to give an awesome display of fire. The prophet Elisha followed him, bringing a boy back to life by causing him to sneeze. These prophets challenged the Israelites and their kings to return to God's better ways. But the Israelites would not listen. Distracted in their own rebellion, other nations swept in and conquered both of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. God's people were forced out of the promised land, and many were taken away to be slaves once again. The temple was destroyed, and the people lost everything. This was a time called the exile, where many of the Israelites, now called Jews, were scattered across different lands. One prophet named Daniel was sent to a city named Babylon. The law demanded that everyone pray only to the king of Babylon, but Daniel refused and prayed to God 3 times a day. So Daniel was thrown into a pit of hungry lions. But God closed the mouths of the lions, and Daniel emerged the next morning without a scratch. Though scattered, God was still watching over the Jewish people, and God gave them hope, speaking through the prophet Jeremiah's words. "I'll make a new covenant with the people of Israel, returning them to the promised land and filling their hearts and minds with my ways." 60 years later, this hope was realized. The Persian Empire freed the Jewish people to return to their promised land. A small number gathered back in the capital city of Jerusalem, and a new, smaller temple was built under the leadership of Ezra. Reunited, they celebrated and shouted with joy. But the elders wept in remembrance of what was lost. Prophets like Malachi and Isaiah pointed to the future and a coming king, a Messiah, one who would fully restore Israel and bring a new kingdom of peace. So the Jewish people waited and hoped, and God would not speak through the prophets again for 400 years.
Following the 400 years of silence by God, Jesus Christ came on the scene, and his people received him not. Following Jesus Christ's coming, his crucifixion, and the time that followed, by the time of 70 AD, following what was called the Great Revolt of the Jews from 066 to 70 AD, the Jews were once again driven out of Jerusalem. The walls of Jerusalem fell and they were breached on Tammuz 17, which has very significant tie-ins to America today, which we'll cover at another time, which we've covered before. It's also the same time of the beginning of the breaching of the Old Testament and the fall of the first temple that fell in the Old Testament. They all fell on the 9th of Av. So we have the connection of the temples falling and the rebellion of God's people all tying in together, and they actually tie in to the United States for our birth and the potential fall of America. From the fall of 70 AD, Jerusalem, for the next 1900 years, Jerusalem endured one overthrow after another, as one country and one faith overthrew each other until what was called the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which began, as many people believe, as we'll say in just a few minutes, the time of the fig tree that Jesus Christ spoke about in Matthew 24. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during World War I, announcing the support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. For the first time in 1900 years, God was preparing a way for the Jewish people to come back to Jerusalem to fulfill prophetic. So now let's take kind of events now. Let's build it up, and we're going to bring this close in this segment before we take a break, bring us up to 1947, the year before the establishment of the State of Israel. God prepares the way for Israel to come home. And what you're seeing on that screen right now is actually real footage of General Allenby coming into Jerusalem in 1917 as the British had actually defeated the Ottoman Turks. After the fall of a 400-year reign of the Ottoman Turks, Jerusalem is back into the hands of the British. It is called the Balfour Declaration, and it was God's way of laying the foundation for a homeland for the Jews. Homeland for Israel. Isaiah 11, verses 12 and 13 says this, "And he will lift up a standard of the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel and will gather the dispersed from Judah from the four corners of the earth." The Jews today claim that the fulfillment of their homeland is the beginning right here of the dispersed, what they call the diaspora, or the displacement of the Jews from around the earth. So as God says he will gather the Jews from the four corners of the earth, the Jews believe that the beginning of this diaspora began to be removed in 1917. "And the adversary of the Jews shall be cut off," God says, "and Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim," showing us the tribal conflict that began in the Old Testament and the breaking up of the two nations, the nation of Judah and the nation of Israel, would eventually all come back together. And they're believing that that was taking place in the beginning at 1917. What you're looking at here is the actual proclamation that was given in Jerusalem by the British government. It says this. He says, "I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of the Majesty's government, following the declaration of sympathy for the Jewish Zionist aspirations which have been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with the favor and the establishment of Palestine of a practical home for the Jewish people, and will use the best of the endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights and the existing of the non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights of political status enjoyed by the Jews in any other country. And I said, I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. It was an incredible task that they believed would be easily undertaken, that if they simply took the land, removed the Turks, and respected all the religions, that this would be a smooth and an easy transition for the Jews. Never could it be underestimated more than it was at that specific time. It is talked about in this book called the Balfour Declarations, the origins of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And until people understand that the principles of what we're looking at here, they're not physical. It's not just a physical land. It is the struggle between Satan and God, and Satan trying to eliminate Jesus Christ from coming back to his land called Jerusalem, that this conflict will never end. So what we're looking at now is the beginning of 101 years of conflict that will not stop till Jesus Christ returns and puts an end to all of this. Now, what's really interesting, now I'm going to bring in something you may not have heard of before. This is called the 10-year Jubilee Prophecy of Jerusalem. This is by Rabbi Judah ben Samuel, who lived from the time of 1150 to 1217. And he made this incredible prophecy, and he was really, really close. So I want to bring this out because it does tie in to the prophecies in the end time relationship with Jerusalem and Israel. He said this: when the Ottomans conquered Jerusalem, they will rule Jerusalem for 8 Jubilees. Now, he wrote this 300 years before the Ottomans actually took over Jerusalem. So now, this is what he writes. When they conquered Jerusalem, they will rule Jerusalem for 8 Jubilees. Afterwards, Jerusalem will become a no man's land for 1 Jubilee. Now, a Jubilee, in case you're not familiar, is 50 years. At the end of 50 years, everything goes back to its rightful owner. Then, in the 9th Jubilee, it will once again come back in possession of the Jewish nation, which would begin to signify the beginning of the Messianic end-time rule, and at that time would begin the 10th Jubilee. All right, so now watch how close he was. Now, how he wrote this, and it was God-inspired, I don't know. The Ottomans conquered Jerusalem in 1517, almost 300 years to the date when he wrote this. All right, so the Ottomans do take over Jerusalem. Now, the prophecy was that they would rule for 8 Jubilees. Now, watch what happens. They ruled until they were removed by the British in 1917, and then you see that at the Balfour Declaration. That's a total of 400 years or 8 Jubilees, just like he said. Afterwards, Jerusalem would become a no man's land for 1 Jubilee. So now, from the period of 1917 to the period of 1967, Jerusalem was split. It had different rulerships of the different nations. You had the Jews, you had the Arabs, you even had some Christians that were still in there. So it was never under control of one person or one country. So they call this the no man's land. Then it will once again come back into the possession of the Jewish nation, which would signify the beginning of the Messianic end time. So then you have, by 1967, and the Six-Day War, which we'll talk about in this program today, you have it coming back into the possession of the Jews once again, fulfilling again the prophecy that he gave back in 1217. That was the Six-Day War, took control of Jerusalem, and from that time on, from the 67 on, they believed that according to his prophecy, that would begin to usher in the return of Jesus Christ. So he's very close. He's very close, but the next Jubilee brings you to 2017. So many people thought last year was the return of Jesus Christ. But never forget, God says he can delay his coming, or he can speed it up. So whether he's right or not, up until this stage, he was absolutely correct. And believe it or not, he may still be correct, because the age of the return of Jesus Christ doesn't start at one moment. It's a period of time, as we see in Matthew 24, and we'll talk about briefly. The timeline of events now. So Matthew 24:32 says, "Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branches are ready and become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you see also that when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. So many people believe that the 1917, the Balfour Declaration, and making a way for the homeland of the Jews, that we have actually entered into the period that you're looking at in Matthew 24. However, now pay attention to this. Others believe that it's in 1948 that it began the period of the fig tree, and others still believe that even in 1967 was the beginning of the fig tree. I'll leave that for you to decide. We're just telling you the story today. All right, so going on. During the years from 1718 and 1917, the area of Israel and around Jerusalem became a vast wasteland. Mark Twain's visit to Lebanon and Syria and the Holy Land in 1867, look what he writes. Here's a quote. "It's a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given wholly over to weeds. It's a silent, mournful expanse, a desolation." He said in his visit, "We never saw a human being in the whole route, hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere." He says, "Even the olive tree and the cactus, whose fast friends of a worthless soil, almost deserted the country." That is what he was looking at when he first visited what was called the Holy Land. Now, I brought you in a slide here from a sermon that I delivered a couple years ago that we're going to put it up on our archives for the vault so that you can go back and take a look. But here's actually a photo that you're looking at here of Mark Twain when he entered into the Promised Land, the Holy Land, in the 1800s. So from the vault, make yourself a note, it's called the Millennial Pioneers. If you haven't seen that sermon, you might want to go right for it or go look online, and you can see it in the vault and you can watch it right online. Or if you were at the feast, pull out your DVD and take a look again, and you'll see how all of these prophetic events are coming to pass. Now, let me show you now what the land looks like according to prophecy and why people think that God's fulfilling his prophecy now. Here in Isaiah 27, verse 6, "And Israel shall blossom on a bud, shall fill the whole face with fruit, and the Holy One of Israel has been glorified." Glory. Now look at these trees. Look at these nut trees that they began to bring in fruit. Look at the flowers. Look at the plants, the food. Look at the fields and the water and everything that they've been putting through. And compare that to what we just saw by Mark Twain. To give you an idea what it's like when it wasn't in the Jewish people's hands and when it is. The vast difference of blessings and cursings even on the land. Even has mass tourism over in Israel. What a beautiful sight overlooking the sea. And here's just one area of downtown, right along that coastline. You see how rich and how beautiful the Israelites today, which are the Jews. So we understand that the Jews today are not all of Israel, as a lot of people think. And the nation of Israel today is actually a nation of the Jews. So I'll show you something in just a few minutes. So now, let's take a break. That's the background. So that's the background of where we're at. So when we come back, we're going to go into 1947 to 1967 and the transformation of Israel in becoming a nation. But let's take a break now. We want to take a few moments and we're going to celebrate a little video here for mothers because this is Mother's Day weekend. So when we come back, we're going to talk 1917 and 1948 and the birth of Israel. So let's take a break. Let's watch this special video for Mother's Day. It's simply called Mom.
This spring, only one hero can save her family and prevent disaster.
Mom, we're gonna be late for school!
I don't think so. Whoa.
Experience the phenomenon that critics are calling inspiring.
Mom, I can't find number 17!
Come on, Billy! Dig deep!
A lot of fun. And pure genius.
Mom, where's my phone?
Table.
Keys.
Mudroom.
Dragon Man?
Under the couch between the monkey and the flip-flop.
How does she do that?
created by God to demonstrate his love with grace, elegance, and poise. She is Mom.
Hey, honey, have you seen my butane torch?
Isn't that great? Hey, we got one more Mother's Day video too before it's all over. It's called The Sequel. We've been bringing you back to that in just a few minutes. All right, we're back to our program today, Israel, 1917 to the birth of Israel. It's the roots of a modern day Exodus. So if we look back in the Old Testament, we see that you're looking at a parallel of many of the events that was taking place back with Moses and the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. It's also showing us a type of what's going to be like before the return of Jesus Christ. From 1933 to 36, there was a mass Jewish immigration to Palestine. This was at the beginning of the roots of the Nazis and Hitler beginning to take over Germany and running out all the Jews during that time. The Nazis' assumption of power triggered massive refugee crises as the German Jews sought to find safe haven from persecution from 33 to 36. The Jewish Holocaust began about that time, from 39 to 45, as it kicked into full gear. So at the outbreak of World War II, where Palestine and Zionists were enlisting in large numbers, even at that time, in the homeland of the Jewish people, the Jews themselves were struggling to find their own identity and were fighting with the British. So the mandate, the Balfour Declaration, never came to pass. It never satisfied anyone to be able to give them the homeland because they didn't understand the principle is spiritual, not physical. So while the Jews were being persecuted all around the world, and especially in Europe and Germany, even in their homeland, they were actually being persecuted by the British. So little skirmishes and wars were taking place even at that time as God began to make the way back.
Adolf Hitler's monstrous design for the Jew became clear after the night of November the 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Soon after, Hitler spoke for the first time in public about the extermination of European Jewry.
Und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
Just like with the children of Israel who came out of Egypt as Pharaoh tried to destroy them once and for all. And just like at the time of Jesus Christ when they just tried to destroy all the firstborn, in type what we're looking at right here is going to be another type when Satan goes after the remnant, the seed of the children of Israel, to destroy them one more time. While this destroying is going on, God is preparing to make a way to show us a land that's going to be given to his people, just like the millennial reign with Jesus Christ. Just like ancient Israel, the Jews today, and back then, were driven out by persecution, just as they're going on right now. In the book of Exodus, we read that the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, and I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good land, to land flowing with milk and honey. And as we have showed you from just a few of those pictures, the Jews today believe that the promised land, that where they live today and why there are so many coming back to Israel even today is because of the fulfillment of the prophecies as we are looking at right here, that they have gone back already to the promised land, not realizing that this is a type, the physical, making way for the return of Jesus Christ, whose feet are going to stand on the Mount of Olives, and everyone will see him on that day when we move into the true promised land and the millennial reign with Jesus Christ. 1947. So 1947 now, the British realize that this problem that they have is greater than they can handle. So in 1947, Great Britain, unable to recoil from its conflicting obligation to both the Jews and the Arabs, requested that the United Nations take up the question of Palestine in their May meeting. So in 1947, on May 29th, the UN made a decision to give the land and the home to make a state for Israel. We have that video coming up right here. 1948, the state of Israel will be born. So now, in this nation, as you can see, the state of Israel was born in 1948, as you can see in that newspaper. But 1 year before that, the UN meets because of the British throwing their hands up that they couldn't bring peace into the Middle East. God talks about that in what's called a nation is born in a day. Shall I bring the time to birth and not cause it to be delivered, says the Lord? Who shall cause the delivery and the shutting up of the womb, says your God? What we're going to look at now is God bringing Israel to the point of just about being born in one day. So let's play this video now. This is the British mandate and the UN making a resolution to establish the state of Israel in 1947.
I need hardly tell you how much His Majesty's government deplore the state of unrest and disturbance into which Palestine has been plunged.
Mr. Bevin directed the British representative to the United Nations to announce Britain's decision to withdraw from Palestine.
Years of strenuous but unavailing effort, His Majesty's government have reached the conclusion that they are not able to bring about a settlement in Palestine based upon the consent of both Arabs and Jews. It is for this reason that they have brought the problem before the United Nations, hoping that the General Assembly would be more successful in the search for an agreed settlement.
By mid-May 1947, not a single government in the United Nations had come out clearly in favor of the establishment of a Jewish state.
It was then that we heard a stunning suggestion, and from whom should it come but Andrei Gromyko.
Элементарных прав еврейского народа объясняет стремление евреев к созданию своего государства.
The suggestion was that Palestine be partitioned between a Jewish and an Arab state. That was the first moment at which I could predict a success in the United Nations debate. In May 1947, the United Nations set up a special committee on Palestine.
It really was a turning point. Now, if that commission had not recommended Jewish statehood, we would have had no chance whatever of securing a resolution for a Jewish state in the General Assembly. It was very impressive that 11 men, who were by no means the central luminaries in their governments, none of whom had any experience in making drastic historic decisions, all came to the conclusion that the British mandate had to end.
Striking appeal to the United Nations Committee was made by Chaim Weizmann.
We realize that we cannot have the whole of Palestine. God may have promised Palestine to the Jews. It is up to the Almighty to keep His promise in His own time. Our business is to do what we can in a very imperfect human way.
The record of pioneering achievement of the Jewish people in Palestine has received the acclaim of the entire world.
The United States delegation supports the basic principles of the unanimous recommendations and the majority plan which provides for partition and immigration.
My government have consequently decided to lay down the mandate and intend to complete the withdrawal of British forces from Palestine by the 1st of August 1948.
There was breathtaking suspense as the day for the United Nations vote drew near. We scattered to our hotels and made telephone calls all over the world rallying support.
Argentina, abstention. Ethiopia, abstain. France, Yes?
I am confident on the way you will behave in a so serious decision taken by this assembly, because I am decided not to allow anybody to interfere in our decisions.
South Africa? Yes?
Soviet Union? Yes. United Kingdom? Abstain.
Yes?
United States?
Venezuela?
Yes.
Yes? Yemen? No. Yugoslavia? Abstain.
The resolution of the DUC Committee
for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
And so it was adopted that Israel would be given a homeland and now recognized as a state. God says, I will gather the dispersed for Judah. And so God began to gather and to establish the land. Now what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring you 2 parts in video format, telling you all the events that would go on, the Israel establishing their nation, their declaration and the foundation of their documents of what took place. So this video is video 1 of what we call the birth of Israel, part 1.
The Jewish National Council had just 24 hours to prepare for a day that had been 2,000 years in the making. Council members placed a telephone call to Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann, who was in New York, rounding up United Nations support for the new state. When he heard they had voted for statehood, he exclaimed in Yiddish, "What are they waiting for, the idiots?" That same day, Golda Meir was ordered to fly to Jerusalem to meet with outgoing British leaders. She wanted to stay in Tel Aviv and attend the proclamation, but Ben-Gurion was adamant. So Golda boarded a small Piper Cub. But as her plane flew over the Judean hills, the engine malfunctioned, and the pilot was forced to turn back to Tel Aviv. So Golda got her wish, a front row seat at the proclamation ceremony. 350 invitations were sent out to Jewish leaders, rabbis, and members of the Haganah. Dark festive attire was requested, and the invitation stipulated that the time and place of the ceremony was to be kept secret. The council decided to hold the ceremony in the Tel Aviv Art Museum. It was a modest building, small enough to be easily guarded, and partly below ground level in case of an air raid. The council met for the last time to go over the wording of the declaration, which had been written by a group of lawyers. Religious members refused to sign the document unless it contained a mention of God, while others refused to sign anything that did mention God. David Ben-Gurion came up with a compromise. To the final line of the declaration, he added, "with trust in the Rock of Israel," a phrase that satisfied both sides. The night before the ceremony, Ben-Gurion still wasn't happy with the language of the proclamation. So that evening in his home, he rewrote the entire speech. While less than 2 miles away, the Tel Aviv Art Museum was being prepared for the ceremony. 2 carpenters worked through the night to build a small stage. The entire budget for the event was just $200. So organizers borrowed hundreds of chairs from nearby cafes, and local stores lent them microphones and carpets. A borrowed portrait of Theodor Herzl was placed at the front of the room, and 2 blue and white flags were hung on either side of his portrait. The flags bore the same design that had been introduced at Herzl's first Zionist Congress 50 years earlier. At Ben-Gurion's request, the paintings in the main hall were replaced with the work of Jewish artists like Marc Chagall and Samuel Hirschenberg. The stage was set. On the afternoon of May 14th, several council members met to approve the final draft of the declaration. The text was approved unanimously, but just hours before it would be read, the new state still didn't have a name. Historical names like Zion and Judea were proposed and rejected. It was Ben-Gurion who decided that the name would be simply Medinat Israel, the State of Israel. 1 hour before the ceremony, council members rushed home to change their clothes, while a secretary quickly typed out the declaration. With just minutes to spare, Zev Sharef, the man carrying the final copy, couldn't get a taxi, so he hitched a ride to the museum. His car got pulled over for speeding, and a policeman started to write him a ticket. Sharef argued that the ticket wouldn't be legal because the British had left, and there was no longer any government to enforce it. Plus, he added, "If you keep us any longer, there won't be a new government, because I'm the one holding the Declaration of Independence." The policeman waved them on, and just 1 minute before the ceremony, Sharef handed Ben-Gurion his speech. Despite the instructions for secrecy, the news had leaked out, and a large crowd gathered outside the museum. Jewish leaders were now racing the sunset to finish the ceremony before the Sabbath began at 5 o'clock. At 4 p.m., David Ben-Gurion called the meeting to order. The crowd rose and sang Hatikvah. Then Ben-Gurion read the declaration aloud.
The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here they first attained to statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. Thus we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel. We appeal to the Arab inhabitants of the State of Israel to preserve peace and participate in the upbuilding of the state on the basis of full and equal citizenship. We appeal to the Jewish people throughout the diaspora to rally around the Jews of Eretz Israel and to stand by them in the great struggle for the realization of the age-old dream, the redemption of Israel. Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel, we affix our signatures to the proclamation on the soil of the homeland, in the city of Tel Aviv, on this Shabbat Eve, the 5th, 1948.
There are so many words in that declaration that just resonate with the proclamations of God, but one in particular says that they have given us the eternal book of books. That is a prophetic fulfillment of the New Testament, where God talks about the Jews, and he said that they were given the oracles of God, and they have maintained those oracles of God for us today. So now let's go on with that nation being born in today. Let's pick up another scripture before we get into part 2 of the birth. It says, "Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children." These prophecies are talking about an end time and even a reverse that they delivered before they have the persecution or before they are in labor. And very similar with Israel, they were given birth before they went into labor, because the very same day that they were given birth, that night at 12:01, war broke out in Israel. Let's talk about that now in part 2 of our video of Israel. So let's play that video right now.
After each member of the new government had signed the proclamation, the orchestra played Hatikva once again. As the music died down, Ben-Gurion declared, "The state of Israel is established. This meeting is adjourned." It had taken just 32 minutes to bring independence to a people who had been without a country for 2,000 years. Outside the museum, hundreds of people danced while others wept. That night, Ben-Gurion wrote a simple entry in his diary.
Throughout the country, profound joy and jubilation. And once again, as on 29th November, I feel like the bereaved among the rejoicers.
Everybody was cheering in the streets. It was a big thing, dancing in the streets and all this. And he was standing in the back there. And he was asked, "This is a great day. This is your dream come true. 2,000 years we're in diaspora. You didn't like the diaspora. You want Hebrew, you want a state, you want this, you've got it." He says, "What the people are dancing here, what they don't know is tomorrow we got a war." And he said there's going to be a big prize.
It wasn't long before Ben-Gurion was proven right. In the Declaration of Independence, he had offered the Arabs an equal place in the new state. But that night, his olive branch was answered by the roar of Egyptian warplanes. At 1 minute past midnight, they bombed the city of Tel Aviv. And at dawn, tanks from 5 Arab armies rolled into the new state of Israel. Jewish diplomat Abba Eban later recalled that Israel knew the taste of birth and the fear of death in the same moment. A year later, in 1949, all sides had grown weary of fighting. Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria signed armistice agreements with Israel. The Jewish state had survived the first of many challenges to her existence.
The taste of birth and the fear of death in one moment. In 1967, just a few years later, another battle broke out, and it was called the Six-Day War, when actually Israel came in to took place and control the entire city of Jerusalem. It was in 1967 that Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. After only 19 years, 3 Arab nations surrounding Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan formed an alliance to destroy Israel from existence. And the preemptive strike against Israel was overpowered, and 3 nations were destroyed in simply 6 days. Following the war and the conclusion, what you're looking at on the screen right now, let me point this out here, is that on this picture, what you're looking at is the Wailing Wall. Until 1967, if anyone would go to the Wailing Wall, they had to go through the Arab city and the Arab town, and this was the only area, this alley, that they had available to Israel, to the Jews, to be able to reach that Wailing Wall. This is a picture of that today. All right, this is a picture of the same area that you were looking at of that Wailing Wall. So right after 1967, they tore down the buildings and the walls that surrounded the Wailing Wall to make way for the children of the Jews.
In a narrow alley. But now, Diane wants to remake this quarter into an open plaza that can hold thousands. The Wailing Wall is to be transformed, yet many want more than a short-term victory.
We were in a state of shock those first few days. For the first time, people could visit Jerusalem and the territory.
But for the moment, Israelis are triumphant.
So from that time on, the children of Israel controlled Jerusalem, and as we saw in the prophecy of the 10 prophecies of the Jubilees, it came to fulfillment in 1967. So now, Peace, peace. So we are going through a period of time now when peace, peace, when there is no peace in Jerusalem as everyone tries to take place. I just got a couple things here. From 1973, it was called the Yom Kippur War, where they thought they could attack and destroy Israel on their most sacred day, that they wouldn't fight back. And then another time I want to bring up here, which is very important, it was the peace accord with Egypt and Anwar Sadat, that this could have been a lasting peace had this continued. In March 26, 1979, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty in the Sinai Peninsula that reverts Egyptian sovereignty back to Egypt itself. But as soon as it was signed, within a short period of time, in front of the whole world, in this parade that was taking place, a truck that was hijacked by gunmen, as you're seeing in this very poor clip, which is the only clips available at the time. They jumped out of the truck in front of the viewing stand, and Anwar Sadat was shot and killed along with others and many wounded at that particular time in 1981. And so Israel again and Egypt and the surrounding nations would not find the peace that it sought for to be long-lasting. So now, let's take a break now. When we come back, we're gonna go into some inspirational stories that took place during this period of time from 1948 till today, believe it or not. And so we're also going to talk about America and its tie-in to the birth of the Israeli Air Force. And then we're going to talk about TNT. What is TNT? It is the presidents Truman, Netanyahu, and Trump. All right, so let's take a break. Let's pay tribute to Mom today. Another humorous video to Mom. It's called Mom, the Sequel.
Last year, she amazed her family. But now,
Mom, my science project is due tomorrow.
Jeremy hates me.
when chaos strikes,
Mom, I want to play Xbox. No, it's my turn.
her true powers will be revealed.
Hey, honey, your mom said she's gonna stop by later. Is that okay?
Do you hear that?
I don't hear anything.
Exactly.
I'm painting.
Natalie, what did you do?
How did she know?
Gifted by God with the power to read minds.
I don't have any homework.
No.
I mean, I did all my homework.
No.
Well, I did some of it.
No.
Fine, I haven't started yet.
There's the truth.
The wisdom to restore peace.
He said, that's it. We're finished. So sick of this texting.
What? Let me see that. Wait, this says sick of this testing, not texting.
All right. He was taking the ACT. Thanks, Mom.
The insight to see the future.
I forgot to think of a science project.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Yes!
With a verse of unlimited capacity. And her secret weapon, the look.
Hey.
Oh, come on, Billy!
These abilities combine to form the ultimate example of warmth, tenderness, and dignity. She is Mom.
How do you like my new ride?
Welcome back. Aren't they great? You know, what's really funny is moms do all that stuff. I mean, it's like it's natural to them. They're in everything, taking care of the whole household. When I saw these commercials, these videos that were put together, I said, wow, we got to have that. Because moms, we love you. You do all of that. God bless you. All right, let's go on. Our first little inspirational video, we've played this once before, but it's been quite a while back. I want to play this again. This is when war breaks out in Israel. I'm sure you can all read that because we all speak Hebrew. You ever notice people talk to you in Hebrew? Then they got to tell you in English what they just told you. So why not just talk in English? So yeah, I put it up in Hebrew, but this is what it says in English. At 12:01, May 15th, 1948, the war breaks out. And the Israel does not have an air force to protect them. So what we want to do now is we're going to take a little video showing you how the United States flyers from World War II start the Israeli Air Force, a video that's typed in a movie that's called Above and Beyond. Let's play that video now.
I was in Minot, North Dakota, partners in a used car and truck business. Money, girlfriends, cars, the whole enchilada. When I got this phone call from New York.
I got a letter from a friend of mine at TWA. Call this number and ask for Swifty. Just like that. So what the hell, I called the number. Livingston, where the hell are you? Been waiting a week for you. I said, waiting for me? Yeah, we need you right away.
I said I'd wear a flying jacket, a leather jacket, so they would recognize me. And they said to bring a logbook of proof that I was a pilot.
They were meeting at a hotel on 57th Street, New York, the Henry Hudson Hotel. Served great martinis.
A fellow who identified himself as Steve Schwartz, apprising me of the fact that Israel was going to declare itself a state, that they were going to be attacked by at least 5 Arab armies, and they had no way to defend themselves, except that they had purchased some airplanes, but they had no one to fly them. And would I be in a position to help?
The idea the Jews were going to fight, I found exciting. It's about time.
It wasn't like a newspaper had joined the Haganah. It was illegal, of course. He said, look, I know there's going to be a war there, and I'm a fighter pilot, and I want to go there.
And I had just made up my mind that nothing was going to stop me. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do this.
The alternative is too hard for me to envision, the possibility of what the Arabs could have done. And they talked about the fact that what Hitler did will be nothing compared to what we're going to do. You know, you're talking about 600,000 Jews and 50 million Arabs surrounding them. I didn't see how they could possibly survive.
The Arab countries had established air forces. We had almost nothing. 4 junked airplanes. Different propeller, different engines from spare parts that the German Air Force left behind in Czechoslovakia.
I remember sitting in the cockpit of my Me-109 wearing a German uniform, a German helmet, a German parachute, what's a nice Jewish boy from St. Paul doing in a place like this? The irony of it did not escape any of us.
The Arabs had squadrons, they had planes, they had tanks, they had guns, they had everything, except that will to win that the Israelis had, that they had to win.
He says, look, 6 miles from where we're standing now at the airbase is the whole Egyptian army of about 10,000 men, about 500 vehicles, tanks, trucks, and tankers, and we have nothing to stop them. I said, well, tomorrow I was going to go. He says, if you don't go now, they'll be in Tel Aviv in the morning and there's no Israel.
These airplanes had never been test flown. They were assembled in the hangar, and they just started up, taxied out, and attacked the Egyptian army coming up the coast.
I looked back and I saw the land of Israel. I looked there, I saw the enemy that came to destroy us. I just did a quick Shema Yisrael, even though I'm not religious. Turned the airplane upside down because the dive bomb, the steeper the dive, the more accurate is the hit.
I told Lou, this is about the dumbest thing that I'd ever heard of, and I would never have done it, but they stopped the Egyptians cold.
I felt more at home in Israel than I did in the United States. I felt this is my home. As a Jew, I now felt proud of being Jewish.
I was born to be here on that moment of history to contribute to Israel's survival.
I had done something good for once.
We built an Air Force. We started an Air Force.
If you wrote the history of the Jewish people 1,000 years from now, there are two things that I can tell you will be in it. One is the Holocaust, one is the birth of the State of Israel. The people who went to Israel and participated in this effort were really part of two of the most significant, incredible, devastating, tragic, euphoric episodes in Jewish history, I think for all time.
Shortly before I left, I happened to be in Tel Aviv when they were bringing in refugees from the death camps in Europe. I remember them getting down on their hands and knees and kissing the ground. I knew then and there that was the reason that I came.
Of Israel. The birth of Israel is a miracle. As you can see, God interceded and protected that nation to establish the homeland and to prepare for the return of Jesus Christ. It also brought out the bond of two brother nations, the United States and Israel, that exist even to this day. This is the first statement by America, who was the first nation to recognize formally the state of Israel. This is what Harry Truman wrote and sent following the UN resolution and the birth of Israel. This government has informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and in recognition has been requested by the provisional government thereof, and the United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel. But if you can see that, it's kind of small and it's hard to read. When it was actually written, it was called is the Jewish state. And it was later changed because of Ben-Gurion in their Declaration of Independence. And because of that, and instead of being called the Jews today, it is called the entire state of Israel, not realizing that the lost tribes still exist and are not there yet with the state of Israel. But they will be, as God brings in the balance of Israel at the return of Jesus Christ. Israel's connection to the U.S. This is actually an amazing piece of video that we have with Benjamin Netanyahu to America. But before I play that, I want to play a video on Truman and Ben-Gurion, and then we'll bring in this final piece as we play the two videos for the TNT presidents of Israel and the United States. So let's play the video now with Truman and Ben-Gurion.
After talking with Weizmann, President Truman instructed the State Department to support the UN's plan for partition in Palestine, which they did reluctantly. Then on May 14, 1948, President Truman recognized the new state of Israel, just 11 minutes after the British mandate officially ended.
The United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel.
10 days later, Chaim Weizmann visited the White House and gave the president a Torah scroll as a symbol of Israel's gratitude. Truman's response? Well, thanks, Cham. I've always wanted one of these. Regarding his support for Israel, Truman would later say, I am Cyrus.
When Harry Truman, in retirement, is honored for having recognized the state of Israel, the words that come out of his mouth are, I am Cyrus. He was the one who helped the Jews return to the homeland thousands of years later. And he was the one who helped the Jews rebuild the Third Jewish Commonwealth. And he was the one who history was fortunate enough to have in the right place in the right time. History was fortunate, the American people were fortunate, the Jewish people were fortunate. He was a true hero.
I bring to the American people the warm greetings of the people of Israel and our gratitude for the unfailing sympathy of America with our efforts for independence and regeneration.
David Ben-Gurion became the first Prime Minister of Israel and the first Minister of Defense, offices he held for 14 years. He was later named one of Time magazine's 100 most important people of the 20th century.
In our revival, we have been inspired by the message of our Bible and by the traditions of our ancient history, which elevate the dignity of man and the principle of justice, and which command us to love our neighbor.
When Ben-Gurion retired from political life, he moved to a kibbutz in the Negev desert, where he spent his final years writing a history of Israel. In November of 1973, Ben-Gurion suffered a cerebral hemorrhage that would take his life 2 weeks later. At the same time, his grandson Alon was a patient at a different hospital. He had fought as a paratrooper in the Yom Kippur War and was still recovering from serious injuries.
I knew about him, that he's in the hospital. He didn't know about me. When he asked where's Alon, they said, he's in the field, he's fine. Someone bought me a small TV, I'll never forget it. We saw the funeral through the television, black and white. Some of the doctors came and they sat with me. The doctors said it's an end of an era.
Since its rebirth, Israel has survived wars, terror attacks, and political opposition to its very existence. At the time of independence in 1948, there were just 650,000 Jews living in Israel. Today, that number has grown to more than 6 million, and every year, thousands more from around the world are coming home.
About a month ago, Benjamin Netanyahu was in America, and he actually went on Mark Levin's, sorry, it was, is it Levin?
Mark Levin, yeah.
All right, let me start that again. All right, you ready? About a month ago, Benjamin Netanyahu was in America, and he was on Mark Levin's program, and he talked about the tie-in, bringing in President Truman all the way through to President Trump today. Let's play that video. Video is a short, 1.5 minute video, and I'll be right back.
How important was it to you, to the people of Israel, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital, and we're moving our embassy there in May?
I think all Israelis applauded. Just about all of them applauded. That's an understatement. There's a sense of history here. I said this to the president when I spoke to him in the Oval Office the other day. I said, we have a long memory. And we remember how 2,500 years ago, the great Persian king Cyrus issued the proclamation that allowed the exiles, the Jewish exiles in Babylon, to come back to Jerusalem and build our temple there. We remember how 100 years ago, the British foreign minister, Lord Balfour, issued the Balfour Declaration that recognized the rights of the Jewish people in our ancestral homeland. We remember 70 years ago how President Harry S. Truman recognized, I think he was the first leader to recognize the Jewish state. And we remember how President Donald J. Trump recognized Israel, or recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and decided to move the American embassy there. These are historic deeds. They will be remembered by our people that way for the ages.
They'll be remembered that way for the ages, he says. The plans are now that next week, the United States will be the first nation on this planet to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, just like it was the first nation to recognize Israel as a state back in 1948. It will be the 70th anniversary of the birth of Israel. Now, we understand here on God's Unchanging Word that these are using the calendar and the times that the world uses today in understanding of May 14th. The Jewish people today, they recognize the Hebrew calendar, and for them, their 70th anniversary took place in April, just a few weeks ago, according to the Hebrew calendar. But for the rest of the world, and as we pay tribute today to the 70th anniversary, we pay honor to Israel for that 70th anniversary. I've got one more video that we want to bring in before we close to pay tribute. This is a video that I know you're going to love. It was filmed in Jerusalem with 12,000 people participating in the auditorium. And I want you to pay attention to the words as they pay honor to God. They pray for His protection. They pray for His blessings. And watch the honor, the respect, and the love they have for their nation and their flag. Take a look at this video, and we'll bring this to a close when I come back.
על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר ועל הטוב, על בלנו והתינוקת, שמור לי הטוב. על האש המבוערת, על המים הזכים, על האיש ששב הביתה מן המרחקים. קטן על החומה, וגדול מבחרתך ומלחמה. אנא שמור לי על כל אלה ועל אהובי נפשי, על השקט, על הבכי ועל זה השיר.
Well, there you have it. That's our tribute to Israel at the age of 70. We hope you enjoyed our program today. We wanted to give you as much as we could in the short amount of time that we had, and we knew we'd run about 15 minutes over, but we wanted to do it anyway so we can put this entire story together. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Be sure to share this video with all your friends. Have a great week, and we'll be back next week as we prepare for Pentecost and the freedom for the great land that we live in, the United States of America. God bless Israel. God bless you. And God bless America. Till next week, God be with you.